Now, if you click through to here, then you may already know that in 1745, the Jacobites gathered at Glenfinnan before marching all the way down to cross the border in England. And they threatened the Hanoverian regime. But what if the Jacobites had never crossed the border, but stayed in Scotland, ignoring southern ambitions and adherents? If you're interested in the people, places and events in Scottish history, then click the subscribe button at the bottom right of the screen and ring the notification bell to be told when I upload new videos. In the meantime, let me introduce you to some experts. Now, this is the North Inch in Perth. If you'd been here in the autumn of 1745, then you'd have been walking amongst Jacobite clansmen before they headed on to take Edinburgh. They occupied Edinburgh, won the Battle of Prestonpans, and then they were faced with a decision. Do we stick or twist? Do we remain in Scotland or do we cross the border? And it wasn't clear cut. There was a heated debate before that fateful decision was made. And I'm off for a heated debate right now. Let me know in the comment section if you think the Jacobites should have stayed in Scotland. Nearby is the Salutation Hotel, one of the oldest hotels in Scotland, and Bonnie Prince Charlie's administrative base whilst he was on his way south. Now, I was given access to that room used by Charles Edward Stuart to meet with two expert historians and all-round good blokes. I wanted to find out about Jacobite sentiment in Scotland and ask the question, what if the Jacobites had never crossed into England? Murray Pittock is a Fellow of the Royal Society of Edinburgh, a member of the European Academy and one of the world's leading Jacobite scholars. His book, Scotland, A Global History, is a must-read and it'll blow your mind. Chris Whatley is another Scottish historian with wide-ranging interests and a brain the size of a planet, who amongst other books gave us Scottish Society 1700 to 1830, Beyond Jacobitism Towards Industrialisation. Now, I'm going to leave a link to these and many other fine books that these gentlemen have published in the description below. When I met up with them, the first thing that I wanted to know was, what was the state of opinion when Bonnie Prince Charlie arrived in Scotland in 1745? And to what extent did the country support the Jacobites? These two historians had very different views in the situation.
Do you want to start?
That's right.
I feel tension in the air.
So I think Chris has decided that he would rather contradict me than have me contradict him.
Now, Murray reckoned that the Jacobites commanded the support of 55 to 60% of Scotland. Enough to win a referendum. Murray has delved deep into this area, and we discussed 18th century rioting, and he gave examples of the extent to which smugglers in east coast ports like Montrose, Arbroath and Aberdeen flouted the rules of the post-Union Hanoverian regime, leaning towards the Jacobite opposition. The fact that smuggling was a political statement was something that Murray and Chris could agree on, as was the fact that there were regional variations. Scotland wasn't homogeneous.
But I would also say that people who don't like the British state will also be supporters of the Jacobites. They may not fight for them, but they will not inform against them, and they will provide tacit support for their infrastructure.
The total number of people in combat was small compared to the population at large. But if they'd had that referendum, who would have got the floating voters?
I don't know how you can arrive at a figure of 55, 60, whatever. Certainly there are very strong, there's very strong support for Jacobites in parts of the country. No doubt about that. And there is a popular sentiment out there. There is strong anti-union feeling. However, things are changing. The support was stronger in 1715, much stronger in 1715, because of the union and its impact, which is not as was promised in 1706, 1707. But some of those difficulties, if you like, are being ironed out. The economy is beginning to grow. There's no doubt whatsoever about that unemployment is reducing, and underemployed people tend to turn to the opposition, if you like, which is the Jacobite cause, if you like. But there are parts of Scotland too, and this has been the case for 40, 50 years, parts of Scotland where support for what becomes a Hanoverian state is very strong. And basically, Glasgow in the west of Scotland is part of that. Ayr, Glasgow, that part of the country.
So, in spite of the high taxation and poor economic development immediately after the Union, some saw improvement, particularly in the areas that had been Covenanting areas in the late 17th century. If you watch my video on the Jacobites and the Covenanters, you'll see how the Covenanters had been oppressed before the Glorious Revolution, but now those Covenanting areas provided strong support for the new regime.
But those areas are fairly limited geographically to an area just from to basically what would now be North and South Lanarkshire, Glasgow, Renfrewshire and Ayrshire.
And enough to fill Ibrox Stadium on a Saturday. Now, whilst we touched on some serious ideas in history, we had a bit of a laugh as well. And that's what I hope to do across Scotland and Canada in the summer of 2024, and then back to Australia and New Zealand in 2025. You'll get dates, information and tickets for my historical comedy shows by clicking the link top right or in the description below. Chris had done some work on the Edinburgh Ladies. Ooh, misses.
There was a list of higher class women in Edinburgh, and I found that interesting because you do get, and rightly, you get reports of ladies out there standing.
All the Morningside ladies,
all that waving their hankies and throwing
all the single ladies,
throwing their maybe doing their Tom Jones reaction thing. But anyway, it was interesting, I thought, nevertheless, to see this list, which suggested actually the women in this sector. This section of women in Edinburgh were more or less equally divided. In other words, there was support out there for the Whigs. Not enthusiastic in the way. I think there's what I would certainly agree is that the Jacobites had more. There was more passionate support. There were better songs, better poems. The other side is more, if you like, business-like, pragmatic. It's less exciting.
So if the support for Jacobites amongst polite Edinburgh ladies was finely balanced, so was the decision on whether they should continue south. In fact, the decision to cross the border was taken with one casting vote making the difference. But what would have happened if instead of crossing the border, they'd stayed?
They would have been completely stuffed.
Oh, right, okay. I was hoping to kind of have a bit more suspense.
That's right.
Spin it out a bit.
Right.
Fantasize.
I worried that Murray had been a bit quick to jump to judgment. He did concede that the Jacobites had defeated the British Army in Scotland. Recruits started to come in. There was majority support. Unless you believe Chris's point of view. So how could Murray be so emphatic?
The British state's ability to borrow and raise money on international markets was stupendous. And quite honestly, they would have been outspent massively without a far larger number of troops than France was ever going to commit.
So, well, that's it then, isn't it?
Surely it would have ended as it would have ended had the Union not been driven through the Scottish Parliament in the winter of 1706, 1707, and that is English troops, British troops would have come across the border and tried to deal with the Jacobite forces.
you pointing at me? I'm not. You may
Never let it be said, sir.
describe that you're awake, but I certainly would not Jacobite.
No, well, no. You're doing very well tonight in terms of making a case for the.
I'm not making a case. I'm describing the strength of the Jacobite. When I think everyone who looks at this needs to know that for many, many years, British history and Scottish history at every level excluded a vast amount of easily available evidence about the importance of the Jacobites. And that's what I've been putting in front of people for many years. And they're not able to rebut it or refute it because they have simply ignored it. So that is the case. The case is not that I'm doing well selling the Jacobites. I mean, I can sell the Jacobites if I want me to, but I don't particularly want to sell them. What I want to do is to say they're very important. They're a critical part of global history in the 18th century. They're an international movement, and we need to understand what they wanted and how they wanted to achieve it, and what would have happened if they had.
Yeah, no, I think that's pretty valid, yeah.
To a certain extent, you're saying that if the Jacobites had remained in Scotland, ultimately what would have happened is what would have happened if the Union hadn't been agreed in 1707. An English army would have come up to suppress Scotland. But in actual fact, post-Culloden, a British army came to suppress Scotland anyway.
Didn't suppress Scotland.
The Jacobite areas. I know I've listened to some talks from a very renowned historian called Murray Pittock in the past, talking about the British military occupation of Scotland in the post-1745 years. Is that a fair comment?
Well, I would like to quote, maybe paraphrasing, but I would quote Christopher Whatley, who's another very distinguished historian, who said that without the imposition of systematic state terrorism, the British polity would never have been coalesced in Scotland after the years after 1746. So that's more than I would say. I don't think it was systematic state terrorism. I think there's an interesting story to be told, but I defer to Chris in this respect, and I am quoting you.
I sometimes make mistakes.
And it's on these moments that history turns. For me, it was a thrill to talk to Murray and Chris, and I hope that's inspired you. History turns on moments, and I hope that that's given you a deeper insight into Scotland's history and the Jacobites. And not only what was, but what might have been. But there are many other what-ifs in Scottish history, and I explore another one of them in the video that's coming up. You know you have to watch it. Just click the link coming up on screen now. If you'd like to see the full conversation with Murray and Chris, it'll be on my Patreon page. So why not support the channel by clicking top right to become a Patreon member, or buy me a coffee in the description below. In the meantime, Hammy and Dochus can be Lama Life. Sherry and Drasta.